Hello and welcome to this week's edition of Chatting Change. As a podcast founded by the University of Northampton's List Institute, we have the opportunity to talk to our own academics about weekly topics, which is what we'll be doing every 2 weeks starting today. While every other week will feature me as a host interviewing special guests, these weeks will feature our academic hosts applying their expert opinions on a variety of topics. Let's get into the episode by meeting our academic hosts.
So why don't you remind the audience who you are, Liam, and then you can introduce me, and I can say a few words about myself.
Okay, well, when I'm reminding the audience, I'll remind myself who I am. So my name's Liam. I'm the Associate Professor of Supply Chain at the University of Northampton's List Institute. And sitting next to me today is...
Hey everyone, my name's Mills. I'm Associate Professor of Risk, and I'm an anthropologist by training.
Sorry about that. Okay, today we are reinvigorating something we started 3 years ago with our podcasting, and we will be hopefully doing this every couple of weeks and disseminating or dissecting is a better word, the news of the day.
Yes.
And I've picked one news story to talk about today, and Mills has been busy looking at.
Yes, well, two really. Thinking about the challenges posed by the potential re-emergence of terrorism in Northern Ireland, and Liam and I are then going to talk about geopolitical risk in supply chains. He's an expert on supply chains, and we both know something about risk. And then finally, we'll be talking about drones and the asymmetric effect that very cheap drones can have on very modern airports. And hopefully Liam will talk about some potential technological solutions that are emerging around all of that. And we're going to start with talking about recalls, which is something which is bothering you at the moment, Liam. $73.8 billion, apparently, the total cost of the top 10 recalls through history. That's a lot of money.
It's a huge amount of money. And the reason this is bothering me at the moment is we've headed into a global sphere of, and I don't want to overuse the word geopolitical risk across our supply chains, where it seems to be a bit of an issue at the moment in exchanging data and information across borders for one reason or another. And you can just imagine that this situation with recalls is going to become worse, because the less we can see in a supply chain, the worse the problem becomes. And I don't know if there's an end in sight for this. I don't know what your thoughts are on it.
Yeah, and this is a mix of sort of mandatory recalls caused by, I don't know, the detection of maybe foreign matter, bits of metal or something in a product which has got through to the consumers, but also more optional ones where a manufacturer decides to withdraw something just to maintain consumer confidence or something.
Yes, so the top one on the list there is Tylenol, which is a very well-known American...
Yeah, paracetamol, we know it as.
Headache, pain relief. It was $100 million for the recall of a Tylenol. So clearly there was something in the manufacturing process there that was causing them concern. And then to take a hit of $100 million is quite large. I mean,
back in '82, yeah, absolutely. Yep.
So I suppose the challenge we have is not really the recall around automotive or an iPad or something like that. Is that my interest is more in the food side of things.
Right. Okay.
So whenever we're having a recall around food, there's a bit of an issue there. So one of our chums, Richard Hazenberg, who recently did a piece of work, was suggesting that for every person that develops some sort of sickness to do with food poisoning, there's around about £7,500 per week in lost revenue to the state.
I can believe that. I mean, I've accidentally acquired Campylobacter infection twice from kebab shops. Basically, there was a message there, and a higher end restaurant in Docklands of London that served a chicken salad that almost did for me. Yeah, so and it does take one out for a rather long period of time, and if you're even remotely immunocompromised or something, then it's a potentially life-threatening thing. Yeah, so huge costs in you not being able to turn up to work, notifiable disease, that one. So then a local authority has to do a little bit of investigation. I think it's all very unpleasant. But also, if there is a recall done with contaminated product or suspected contaminated food product, there's all that waste to deal with. And that's expensive. And what are you going to do with it? And can anaerobic digesters get rid of all of it at short notice?
Yes. Well, I don't know. That's not the thing. You have that issue. You also have the issue around brand as well. So if you have an issue with a high-end restaurant in London and everyone develops some sort of illness, then there's also the hidden cost associated with people not going there and brand issues in the press and all sorts of wonderful stuff like that.
Yeah, absolutely, and there should be. There should be consequences if these places trying to poison me.
Anyway, I suppose the thing is, Mil, that overriding theme that sits behind this is no matter what it is, whether you're sick in a restaurant or it's parts on a car in Oxford that's being built that needs to be recalled, it all fundamentally comes down to challenges around geopolitical risk.
Yep.
And in the past 12 months, there's been three key drivers with this. We've seen steel tariffs in the US, which have caused massive issues within the industry, both local, national and global. We've got that upcoming Brexit issue that seems to be causing issues.
Just won't go away, that Brexit thing.
No, it won't. And that's beyond our borders here in Europe, because we're still in Europe, so we still have to class that. So it's a global issue. Yeah. And then today, we've seen that China are having huge issues around reinvigorating their economy, and there's been a slowdown. So there's three key areas in the world that are driving the global economy, whether you're doing the R&D, buying it or manufacturing it. They're all suffering at the moment to this geopolitical risk and issues around product recalls.
Yeah, and there's a classic problems that are still going on as well, which also need to be dealt with. We've spoken in the past a lot about counterfeit items that have got even into aerospace and automotive supply chains, leading to very expensive recalls, investigations and so on and so forth. Criminals trying to extract the maximum opportunities they can. Yep. As you said, with the decrease potentially, likely, being shown in some leaked documents recently that Sky News have got about day one of Brexit, with no deal, no information sharing about stuff and people with the rest of the European Union. It's a great opportunity for criminals and others to take advantage of all the turbulence and problems that are going to be around.
Absolutely, yes. I was reading something related to the not very well known organisation called the Mafia and the amount of money that they earn per year in relation to food fraud. It's billions. It was recently in the Times, which I'm sure we can reference at the end of this. I think the piece around that is we'll become more susceptible to organised crime gangs being able to earn billions from this, because they're just in food, for example. There's 12 databases around Europe that we currently share with our colleagues, and we can start to forecast criminal activity. On a no deal, worst case scenario, there will be no vision into the 12 databases. And bearing in mind, these 12 this isn't a Brexit thing. These 12 databases hold information on people outside of the European community as well. Right. So these databases are looking at the global. So, for example, fish supply chains in Vietnam, they're looking into that. Okay. So we're going to have to set up our own direct relationships with these other areas. And there comes a point where these other areas say, well, why are we now going to duplicate effort? You should be, and you always have dealt with these databases. So there's a huge risk around having no visibility and becoming an easy soft target,
right?
For those that want to invoke criminality. So.
And what can individual businesses do about that? If you're a major food service provider or a major UK supermarket,
nothing unless you want to move your business to mainland Europe, and then you can make avail of those databases.
Does it have to be done physically with everything you do, or can you do that like with the equivalent of moving your brass plate into the European Union, or do you actually have to have all your stuff there?
That's another news story. That leads right into Dyson moving their chaps over to Singapore to be able to make avail of trade tariffs, doesn't it?
Bold move. Yeah,
that's exactly what you could do. You can relocate a number of staff to a location, and then all of a sudden your office there, and you can make avail of it.
Okay. So, but obviously not a great deal of time for businesses to do that thinking and make that happen and build relationships to get access to that data. Okay, well, on that happy note, should we move on to topic 2, which is about the potential re-emergence of the spectre of car bombs and terrorism in Northern Ireland, which does throw many of us older folk back to a not very happy period of the Troubles. Some of the listeners will be very familiar with that, and some may have served there in various uniformed guises. Again, tying into our ongoing theme, which listeners will get very familiar with over the weeks and months ahead, Liam, geopolitical risk. Again, a few years ago, the suggestion that terrorism might be breaking out in a big way in Northern Ireland, still part of the United Kingdom. something people just would probably thought very, very low probability. Very high impact if it happens, for those who like risks measured by probability times impact, but very low probability. Now looks rather different. And okay, that may be a long way away to some of us living on the mainland, the main island, as it were. But an awful lot of our chicken and other products from Lidl and Aldi and so on comes from Northern Ireland, just to pick one sort of product line. But from a supply chain risk point of view, what are your first thoughts about this unwelcome potential decrease in the security situation?
It's pretty much a continuation of the previous conversation, because you if you're not sharing information, then how can you protect a supply lane, from some sort of infiltration? I mean, there was an interesting article I read only yesterday around the use of blockchain technologies to combat some of these issues around supply chains and infiltration. And I've not always been a huge fan of blockchain, because people have always come and used it as a bit of a silver bullet, and they've used it as a finance tool, and they appear to be using it, and I have to be careful, I would say this, for their own personal financial gain.
Yes, indeed. Come and invest in me. It's blockchain. It's great.
Exactly.
It's going to change the world.
Whereas some of the uses that are coming out now, so IBM are doing some great trials in Asia Pacific around this, and there's WWF are doing some stuff in Australia as well.
Yeah.
With blockchain and DNA, and I think that's a really, really, really good way of protecting a supply chain. And one of the uses they were talking about with blockchain is using it to monitor the border. So instead of having a hard physical stop or a video cameras everywhere, and it was a very expensive infrastructure.
Yeah,
is using blockchain to monitor supply chains and items moving through the chain.
Okay. So you have a sort of a virtual border somewhere, like this one in the Irish Sea, which might be part of a Brexit solution. But the actual, if you like, interrogation of the data to work out whether the stuff that's sent to be in a container is what it's meant to be, is done sort of virtually in the ether through a blockchain solution.
Yeah, exactly. The only challenge with that is it's like all data sources. If you put rubbish in, you will get rubbish out.
Yeah, yeah.
So it is beholden on those in the supply chain being able to robustly access and upload the data.
Yeah.
And there is you use food in the supply chain, because there's a huge market in Ireland. The island of Ireland in terms of exports is food.
Yep.
If we take the stat of 96% of all businesses in the food supply chain being an SME, you've got to question their ability to integrate with these very, very detailed systems.
No, absolutely. Well, so there's some technological solutions that assure the integrity and authenticity and traceability of containers and food products and such like. But what happens if there's again an outbreak of terrorism that targets economic centres of economic importance, which could well be a lot of the new businesses in food supply and other things that have broken out that have emerged in Northern Ireland. There's been pretty much a renaissance of the economy there. This kind of puts all that at risk, doesn't it?
Very much so. I don't know how you would deal with that, especially as organisations will no doubt have some of this terrorist activity happening within their businesses by those that sympathise with organisations.
Yep.
I'm really not sure how. I'm not an expert in the area, and I wouldn't even know where to begin how you protect yourself against that.
Challenging times, and also a distraction, well, not a distraction, but another thing to put on the very difficult to do but got to do list for government, which is already arguably distracted by the Brexit stuff. Extra or increased budget lines for the security services and others to ramp up surveillance and protective activity and other things. So it's more money being invested by government when there's not a lot of money around at the moment. And in Northamptonshire, we know that only too well, with the travails that affected our local authority. So again, not a lot of good news around here.
Right, but there is a point behind this. Everyone thinks of terrorism as a physical act, as we've seen recently with some of the things going on in Africa, physically involved in some sort of explosion or bullet or something like that. But more and more of these organisations now are turning to e-terrorism or economic terrorism, I like to call it, where you can actually cause more damage to people and others through an act online. So you physically don't have to do anything. So some of these companies, you could, some of the terrorist acts of the future, or some of the things that we're protecting against, are wholly within the supply chain. And the damage you can do on that, just maybe between here and Ireland and other places, is it doesn't even bear thinking about.
That's true. And you told me the other day about an anecdote from a contact of yours who works in the food industry, that they are very, at the moment they are dealing with some very difficult to counter cyber attacks.
Yeah, that'll be the one that took them 24 hours to react. And it brought down the whole supply chain.
That will be the one. And again, many companies and public sector organisations also have that kind of speed of response. But it's going to be devastating, isn't it, to individual companies to be on the receiving end of that. And arguably, many businesses of all sizes and in all sorts of sectors just haven't realised yet that they are vulnerable. But it's still not very obvious about where you go for a solution, because a technology solution provider will sell you something very expensive, may or may not work. How do you know if you're protected?
And that is potentially an argument rising out of this. Again, I just talked with the logistics and supply chain hat on. There's always been this argument around clusters of businesses, so that you'll site businesses next to each other to reduce travel time, reduce risk, and so on. So in a logistics scenario, you'll have the warehouse co-located to the packing plant, co-located to the truck manufacturer. So it becomes this ecosystem, and self-sustaining ecosystem. And then communities build around that, so you get skills and schools and colleges and all this stuff.
Nice.
It all works really well. So arguably you have that piece. And then there's the hidden piece of infrastructure, which is this cyber. There's any country that's serious about having a decent manufacturing future, or some sort of R&D future, they would invest in their critical infrastructure, protecting the whole nation, rather than having people come in and selling you out-of-the-box solutions maybe not work. So a government would say, actually, you know what, we're going to spend a shed load of money in protecting the infrastructure, especially as we're talking about all these autonomous vehicles and automation inside of a supply chain. You hack into that and it's big problems. So I think there needs to be a review from government on spend on infrastructure, and actually recognising that this cyber piece is part of critical infrastructure. And when you're building and spending billions on something like HS2 or a motorway or something like that, or Camcox, for example, is actually where's the virtual infrastructure that supports this? Because we seem to miss that all the time. It's an afterthought.
Very true. Yeah. Okay. Some complex problems there, and very related to our final topic today, which is one close to my heart in a sense, about asymmetric effects, where something very cheap can cause almost unlimited cost of damages.
I think you're going to have to explain to me what that means, because that all sounds very academic over my head.
Well, accidentally, I'm sure. So last night, flights to Newark were disrupted for a while after a drone was spotted, and obviously in the UK we've seen a certain amount of similar disruption.
So when you said drone was spotted, you're not talking about an academic droning on, you're talking about a physical...
Yes, this was one that was not so easily avoided, unfortunately, as those droning academics that we love to hate. So what do we do about this then? Airports, part of critical infrastructure you've just mentioned. A lot of cyber attacks are often very cheap to mount, with huge costs imposed on businesses and loss of opportunity costs and the rest of it. Airports are pretty much soft targets, to use a phrase we've used a couple of times today. There are some technological solutions which can be deployed to protect airports and other places. And a graduate of our MBA top-up programme set up a company called Drone Defence, which is one of the leaders in that space in the UK. We'll have him on in the future podcast. But in the meantime, before the technology gets out there, and then no doubt it's going to be a total, poacher/gamekeeper battle to try and keep the drones out of planes' way. Are we just going to have to get used to disruption to your favourite form of locomotion, aircraft?
Potentially. I will say, though, I'm quite excited about this drone thing, because Twitter and other social media platforms are available, of course, has been lit up for the past 3 years with experts on politics and Brexit. I'm surprised how many people there are in the country that are an expert at this. All of a sudden, since all this drone stuff, I'm amazed how many experts we have in this country about drones and what you do.
I think some of these people are multi-skilled. No, I think they're the same people.
There's about 66 million people in this country that's an expert on a drone.
They're all drone experts. They're all international trade negotiators.
Awesome.
They're all blockchain experts.
I am full of confidence we'll have all of them on. Anyway, so I was talking to somebody recently at the wonderful Transport Systems Catapult who is an expert in drones. That's what they do. I don't apologise my flippant nature now. I don't understand the technology that goes behind them. I can see their use and their importance.
Yes.
I can also, I'm struggling to understand why you'd want one as a toy. But
I've got several, and I've got to say they are very, very difficult to fly unless you are aged 8, when apparently it is just comes naturally to you. I don't know whether my 8-year-old is going to be a helicopter pilot or something in future, or maybe a Predator controller, but they're massively difficult to fly unless if you spend a 1,500 quid instead of 30 quid, they suddenly get a lot easier. Wow. But but they are quite fun. But anyway,
links quite nicely to what this chap was saying, is that this control piece. So at the moment we have these wonderful bastions of the sky called NATS, of the National Air Traffic Control Service, who guide our aircraft in and out through the airways of the UK and do a wonderful job.
Very congested airspace,
and that involves semi-automation. And all you hear from people is, well, you've had automation aircraft for a number of years. Yes, you have, but you've had semi-automated environment, which still requires the intervention of a human being to talk to each other, to instruct the object as an aircraft to do something based on the airways. He was explaining to me, and quite interestingly, at least I thought, that that's all well and good, and we've cracked the nut with air traffic control at the moment, and there are still risks and there are still incidents that happen, even with this amazing job that they do and the complexities that they have and the software that sits behind it. It's the issue they're having at the moment with any of these drones is automated air traffic control. So how do you get something that's automated to react in an instant along an airway? So if you need something that's automated to move 10 degrees to the right and head off in a different direction, they're not quite sure how you do that. And then to mix that with semi-automated air traffic control is an absolute brain ache for them at the moment. So it goes beyond the scope of trying to geo ring fence an airport and saying any drone that goes anywhere near that will simply drop out the sky. You can't do that, because if the police need to do something, then there's
and you can't just be firing stuff, whether it's electromagnetic or shotgun pellets into the air.
It just doesn't work.
Exactly.
So then the next step would be this automated air traffic control system, but we're at a loss to how that would work. I mean, we can't even. I don't want to peel it back to automated. Well, it is automated vehicles, isn't it? But we can't even get a car to follow another car on a piece of tarmac without it having some sort of sensational crash and it ended up in a newspaper. Yet people seem to want us to be able to automate and do all that sort of stuff in the sky. I mean, that's a whole different level of complexity and danger, personal privacy, restricted airspace, potential of terror at the heart. There's a whole... You can go on for days and days and days talking about the risks associated with this. There is no silver bullet answer to this.
So automation or semi-automation can help us squeeze more aircraft into the same, obviously there's a finite amount of sky up there. However, I'm sure that the development of this has taken into account weather and needing to reroute things according to weather change. But as soon as you mess things up by sort of saying, okay, there's no movements at, let's choose an airport at random, Gatwick, because a drone may be lurking near there, then all of the management of diversion, stacking planes, handling fuel emergencies and the rest of it instantly falls back onto human controllers dealing with the pilots and all the attendant increased risks of all that.
And cost. I know. I look at it very business. I heard something on the radio yesterday. EasyJet had posted that those 2 days or whatever it was cost them £15 million. That's one airline. That's just an airline. And then you have all the infrastructure around it, the shops, the retail units, the people that sell the fuel.
And disrupted holidays and disappointed families. You can't put a cost on that, can you?
Massive.
That's a lot.
It's massive, just because someone decided to do something with the drone, or maybe not.
Or maybe not, indeed. Yeah. But as with recalls, there was no choice but to take the action that was taken by the authorities, was it? You couldn't just continue on thinking, well, we've heard reports of a drone, but we haven't physically seen it, so we're just going to carry on till we spot one, because you cannot contemplate an aircraft actually making contact with a drone on its final approach.
But you make a really good point about a drone hitting a plane on final approach and the catastrophic events that could happen to it. A little bit risque here coming out and saying this, but a good friend of mine worked for a very well-known airline as an engineer, and he spent his Saturday evenings firing frozen chickens into an engine to simulate what would happen with a bird strike.
Yes.
Now, I've seen some of these drones, and they actually have the mass, a smaller mass than a bird does. So, and I could get massively picked up by an engineer here, but if an aircraft can take a bird strike at speed, surely a drone is something similar. But
yes, agreed. But I think that's going to be a matter for insurance and other things, isn't it? Let alone the brand reputational damage. Because if you know a drone might be there, that's different to knowing. To not knowing and not being able to predict that a swan, a seagull, an eagle, or indeed a frozen chicken could be in the airspace that you're flying your plane through.
This was the point I'm trying to make, and I should have made it before I said, is that there is a trade-off with the risk. So somebody will sit around the table at that airport in Sussex and say, we know or we heard reports that there is a drone flying around. Yep. Therefore, we open up the risk manual.
Yep.
And there isn't a piece in here for flying drones. Therefore, it's an elevated risk because we don't know how to react to that risk. Therefore, the best course of action to mitigate that risk is to close the airport. Right. If somebody said there are swans over Windsor, evidently, we know there are swans over Windsor, and we know they go flying around, but it doesn't close down Heathrow Airport because there's a book that you can open and say what happens when there's swans flying over Windsor. So it's an unknown, I suppose, is the point I'm trying to make with drones. And maybe there needs to be more money put into understanding the true risk that drones pose to the industry, aviation, and other forms of transport as well. Yeah. And then being able to give people the tools to be able to make decisions based on the risks presented to them.
I mean, that's a really good point, and one I've not really heard mentioned at all in the media or by the many experts that there are on Twitter that you correctly reference. And from a sort of a contingency planning, business continuity exercising perspective, which is to some degree my background, given that this is now going to be an ongoing challenge, then there does need to be some rehearsed ways in which you go from normal operations at somewhere like Gatwick to getting all those aircraft somewhere else, getting all the repositioning sorted out. Because obviously there is no choice but to shut, I would suspect. But there's got to be a better way of handling the consequences to airlines, to people's holidays, to something else. And that's complicated, but not necessarily complex. But it sounds, to us at least, as though no one's really given it much thought.
And perhaps it's because it's never been a risk before, isn't it?
Well, I don't know. It's easy to say that, but I've just jotted down on my little pad here, remote-controlled helicopters. Now, actually, remote-controlled helicopters, although probably even more fiendishly difficult to fly and a bit more expensive to buy, perhaps, been around for a long time.
Yep.
No one's really flown them near airports before, but could have done. I know in other parts of the world, insurgency conflicts and so on, groups have used all sorts of remotely controlled boats and aircraft and other things. I just wonder whether we, as usual, haven't quite been imaginative enough thinking about the potential risks. Whether today it's a remote-controlled helicopter or a drone for 30 quid or 3,000, is it that new? Potential risk? I'm not sure it is.
I don't think we need to detail all the risks, though. This is the danger we're getting into.
Oh, yeah.
That
true.
Having run companies, if I had to detail every risk that the company was open to and react to every single risk, we wouldn't have been able to open the doors in the morning.
True.
So there is a piece of...
Good point.
Shot down. There is a piece to say there's risk in everything we do. It's how we react to that risk. And there's a... With this particular thing around drones, we really don't know what would happen if something made contact with the fuselage of an aircraft. We just don't. I've seen some quite spectacular stuff on the news on TV where they've flown drones into wings. But I stand to be corrected on this. They're not the wing of a 777 aircraft. They're a wing of a Cessna, and it makes a much sense. I'm not suggesting there's any difference or they're weaker or stronger or anything like that, but no one's actually understood what could or should happen with this.
Yeah.
It's been sensationalized. People don't know how to react to it, and therefore it grew out of control. There was a drone sighting at Heathrow about a week later, if I remember, and I did panic because I was flying out there on my most popular form of transport.
Yes.
But for some reason, it was handled in a completely different manner at Heathrow and had incredibly minimal disruption to flights. There was an evening of some flights got cancelled and diverted, but it did not shut the airfield.
Right.
They were still having to. Maybe that's something to do with twin runway operations or something like that. I don't. Whether you can divert it onto one runway and ring fence the other runway, but they handled it different. Newark last night seemed to have handled it slightly different to the way it was in Sussex. I'm not saying what was done in Sussex was wrong.
No, we don't know the full
It
details
just
of what
seems
they...
to have been an iterative learning process that maybe people have looked at what happened at Gatwick and then transferred that learning to Heathrow and then again to the...
Yeah, I think you make a good point. I mean, it's very easy to become to sort of imagine these drones as some sort of sinister, malevolent force, the like of which we've never encountered. But of course, as you're hinting, aircraft are built to withstand hitting really quite large birds. A big goose or a swan or something is a fairly meaty creature. Or lightning strike and other things.
Every year, so
yeah. So although hitting a drone would be very bad, it's very unlikely to be catastrophic. And maybe this is acquiring a sort of power in our consciousness as travellers, and well, not you because you're fearless, and many of us travellers and airfield operators and others that perhaps it doesn't deserve. But
I'm not suggesting for a second that there's not a risk involved in it.
Yeah.
Or that it wouldn't cause damage. I'm just saying we don't understand that.
Yeah.
And therefore that's causing us to handle the risk in a completely different way.
Yeah.
Than if we understood what the risk was.
Yeah. It's very different, isn't it, to that volcanic dust stuff from a couple of years ago, where actually flying through that, although eventually there were some tests done that showed it wasn't quite as destructive as it was thought, but anyone flying through that was a very bad idea. It seems like actually continuing to operate, knowing that planes are, capable of handling swans and geese and such like, might be the future, complemented by interesting technologies to deter or deny the space to drones.
But I suppose we shouldn't lose sight of the fact that the powers that be shut down the airport for a reason, kept everyone safe.
That's true.
And they did their job, and they move millions and millions and millions of people around every year.
Yep.
And 2 days disruption every 5 years or so is not, in my mind, is a very, very small price to pay. And the complex of that operation, they got a lot of bad press for it. I think if they had to detail every single risk that's out there and have a rule book for it, with a business, they would never fly a single aeroplane. It'd just be grounded. So I think the way they handled it, they got a lot of mocking in the press over it, and maybe they did at Newark last night. But I still think, given what they deal with on a daily basis, it's minor.
Agreed.
In the overall scheme of things, and that people should start actually supporting them.
Yeah, and if there's anything that industry is good at, it's learning very quickly, isn't it?
Yeah.
So I'm sure lessons will be learned, and the airlines and airfield operators will have measures in place to, if it happens again, hopefully adapt and be agile so that people still get away on their holidays and honeymoons and such like with minimal disruption. Well, unfortunately, that's all we have time for this week. Hope you've enjoyed our chitter-chatter. It's been great. Chat in change with Liam. And of course, we very much welcome any topics that you'd like to suggest. So you can reach out to us on our various Twitter feeds, which will be listed below the details of this podcast. And we'd love to get some topics that will challenge us and hold us to our mettle, wouldn't we, Liam?
We'd love to.
Love that. Yeah. So we are academics, but we're not your normal conventional academics. And we welcome challenge and pushback and for some tricky topics to talk about.
Excellent. Thank you, Mills.
Thanks so much, Liam.